Okay, well, if I can compete with dinner here for a moment. This project, I guess you've had a chance to have a quick look at the bicycle earlier while we were milling about. I just want to give you kind of a brief overview of this. This is not a time for detailed technical discussion, but a little bit of its history might be of interest, and something about the idea of this systems integration project that has a Macintosh sitting on top of it. Why a Macintosh on a bicycle? A few years ago, I was sitting around in Columbus, Ohio, consulting and writing and doing various freelance sorts of things, working my tail off trying to pay for something I didn't want, which was a house in suburbia in Ohio. Columbus, Ohio is actually the kind of place that inspires long-distance travel, so it was fairly easy to launch this. It was much easier to start traveling from there than it is from here. But I took off on a much more primitive version of this machine, carrying a little laptop computer with the basic notion of living in the computer networks and riding around the country and combining all of my various passions and interests into a lifestyle. And they were things like travel and adventure and falling in love and high-tech toys and computers and ham radio and all that stuff. And sure enough, I did. I went out and spent 10,000 miles wandering the country by myself and writing about my stories on the computer networks. And that turned into a book called Computing Across America, and was all lots of fun. But there was one problem, and that's I couldn't work while I was writing. I had all this nice stuff with me in the form of early laptop computers, but all those hours spent during the day pedaling the bicycle were fairly useless. So I got the idea of putting a keyboard in the handlebars, which would let me type in binary, like playing the flute. So that was the early version 2 of the bike, was the predecessor to what you see here. It had a switch-encrusted control console with a Radio Shack Model 100 all hacked and built into it, and a handlebar keyboard and a few other things. And basically I could ride along and write magazine articles and things like that, do packet radio, later make cellular phone calls via modem and things like that, all while pedaling around the country. Took on a traveling companion, Maggie, who's sitting over there at the Software Ventures table. But there was one other big problem, and that is that this system was not at all editable. It was a very hard machine. It was designed to do exactly what it did, and when I just came up with changes and other things I wanted to add, they were exceedingly difficult. And so, skipping all the intervening steps, what we have here is version 3. I call it BEHEMOTH. And BEHEMOTH, of course, is an acronym. It stands for Big Electronic Human Energized Machine, only too heavy. It's about 350 pounds, but it has 54 gears to make up for it. The user interface to this machine is a Macintosh portable. I essentially took a portable, threw away all the plastic, and built it into the console here. And I can't get close enough to it to flip up the screen, but the top screen, which you probably saw, hinges up, and that's my primary interface to the bicycle while I'm riding it. There are over 20 microprocessors in this bike now, doing all sorts of different things. Most of them as embedded controllers. But the one that's in charge of all of them is the Mac. And the reason is that it's a beautiful graphic user interface. I'm using Hypertalk. And so, sitting on top of all of this stuff is this stack. And in each card in that stack is a slice of the machine. One maybe is security, another one is power management, there are things like ham radio, network control, all these sorts of things. And while I'm riding along using the handlebar keyboard and the head mouse, there are 3 ultrasonic sensors built into the helmet. These little brass screens up on the sides and the top are ultrasonic receivers, and there's a little transmitter on the console. So as I move my head around, the cursor looks like it's attached to an invisible stick connected to my nose. And there's a little thumb button that lets me click. So here while pedaling the bicycle now, I'm running HyperCard and controlling all the stuff that goes on in the machine with it. For example, there's all kinds of security functions on here. I see the bicycle's nearing $1 million in value now, so I tend to get a little bit paranoid. And whenever I leave it, I want to set up some kind of a meaningful security situation. And the level 1 sensor knows if anybody's within about 30 feet. Then it knows if it's being touched, or if any access panel's being opened, or if it's being sat upon, or if switches are being thrown. And finally, because there's a Trimble GPS receiver, global positioning system, satellite receiver. It knows its exact location on the surface of the Earth down to about 300 feet. So if those numbers start to change without the right password, and with a handlebar keyboard you don't need much of a password, then the system knows that it's being stolen. And so, at which point, it can start beaconing its latitude and longitude on ham radio packet frequencies, or using a speech synthesizer in the cellular phone, dial 911 and say, "Hello, I'm a bicycle, I'm being stolen." This sort of thing does a lot to reduce the paranoia index, but frankly I have to confess that one of the underlying motives behind all of this is fun. There's still this kind of hacker play ethic that drives a lot of us to get into this crazy business in the first place. And as my life was getting more and more serious, doing things for companies and trying to make products and all that kind of stuff, I started wondering where all the fun went. The machines that used to keep me up all night for entertainment suddenly were business tools and they weren't much fun anymore. This is fun. And the whole idea here is to go out and have great adventures and play with a lot of neat stuff. A couple other little highlights. This pack here, this is empty at the moment. This is work in progress, by the way. I think they noticed lots of missing wires and things, that's why. This will have a little solar panel on top of it, and I'll carry a laptop when I'm off the bike. There will be a flip-up antenna on the side, which is a 4800 baud packet radio link between it and the console. So when I park the bike, it's basically now my file server and gateway to cellular phone modems and things like that. I can go up and climb a mountain with my little man pack, sign on to the bike, and then use it to upload and download files or go out into a commercial service and things like that. Also, there's a satellite earth station on here. This area back here will have a big yellow pole that is an antenna mast, and there's an antenna on it called the stacked J pole that gives me access to some low orbit microsats. They're called little 9-inch cubes that were launched a few months ago. And twice daily, at somewhere around 10 or 11 in the morning and evening, anywhere in the world, local time, there is access via packet radio, 1200 baud packet radio, to these little orbiting satellites, which are basically orbiting BBSs. So that's all built into a scheduler right here, and twice a day the bike will sign onto the satellite and send and receive email. And of course, if there's any mail, there'll just be a little message that pops up saying you have mail waiting. And it's like being anywhere else. There's also a heads-up display in the brain interface unit here. You know, it's the private eye. That's going to be used for map data and various other things. I have the ETAC and DeLorme CD-ROMs, which contain maps of the United States down to county road levels. So, with GPS, the bike will show a map and a little icon showing where I am, and more icons showing where my contacts are. It's, I shouldn't get lost anymore. So, anyway, I go into further technical details if anybody's interested, but I know our time's limited here because there's a program coming up. Are there any questions of any sort about what this is all about? Yes? About potholes. Well, my teeth rattle, and actually that's a good question. Almost all the equipment is shock mounted. There are things called Lord mounts, which are little rubber mounts on the console and the equipment bay inside the rump, which incidentally also carries the MIDI environment and the stereo and some other stuff. All that stuff is shock mounted. And there's also things mounted in foam back here. So I pretty much try to isolate the sensitive equipment. Like the hard disk drives are all sitting on separate shock mounted platforms. There are, I don't know, 3 or 4 of them at the moment. Pardon me? Oh, well, that was kind of funny. Years ago, I designed the handlebar keyboard based upon the fact that I play the flute, and I kept thinking, gee, I can get 3 octaves out of 8 or 9 fingers with a flute. Why can't I do text? So I designed it based on that, and I started playing text instead of music. And I explained this for years and years, telling everybody how it's like a flute, and it suddenly dawned on me about 6 months ago that if it's like a flute, I should be able to play it. So I basically hacked a little Yamaha synthesizer, and I'm running it off the Mac MIDI interface. And while pedaling down the road now, I've added a couple more buttons so that I basically can match the flute fingerings and play along with music or just jam while I'm writing. So you had a question? Questions about going uphill with 350 pounds. Slowly. The granny gear is 8 inches. It's 54 speeds, and that low gear is at a cadence of 60, which is 1 revolution per second. I'm running at about 1.4 miles an hour. And the problem that instantly introduces is balance. I can balance at that speed, but it gets a little exhausting after a while. So one thing we're working on, it's not there yet, but it's hydraulically deployed landing gear, or training wheels, if you will. These things will swing down down and lock over center and give me lateral stability while I'm going very slowly. Actually, they do a couple other things too. Now that my primary work environment is on the bike, I'll be able to sit on the bike and just put my feet up and relax and not have to balance with my legs like I do now. So there are really multiple reasons to have these little legs that pop down. So the idea is just to go slow and not be in a big hurry.
Steve?
Yes?
How much of your pedaling energy is consumed by the electronics?
Well, normally none. Most of the power is from the 72-watt solar array that's the trailer lid here. There's another 10-watt one that goes in the suitcase. However, scarce resource management is kind of important here, and one of the things that is I'm a tenth of a horsepower, you know, and this is like a Briggs & Stratton lawnmower engine pushing about a 6-ton motorhome and power ratio. So I don't want to pull any power out of my pedaling energy to run things, and normally the solar panels are enough, but not always. And so the solution to that is in the new front wheel hub, there's a half horsepower regenerative braking controller. It's a variable reluctance motor generator. And when I start to put on the brakes, one of the processors, one of the 68HC11s, sees that I'm trying to slow down. And before letting the hydraulics close, it tries to satisfy my braking needs by pulling power out of the wheels and throwing it into the charge bus. Now, it'll do that even if the batteries are full, at which time the power goes into the refrigerator. The right-hand side of the rump over here is a Peltier effect refrigerator, and that'll draw as much power as I can give it. They're very, very inefficient. But the beauty of it is that I can pump a thermal mass of my drinking water and get my food cold. But more importantly, since the body is thermally limited, while pedaling uphill, I can overheat very easily because I'm blocking my major cooling path by putting styrofoam helmet liner on top of my head. So we're now lining that helmet with a heat exchanger made by Life Support Systems, pumping propylene glycol down through a heat exchanger in the drinking water reservoir, so that all that cooling that's come from regenerative braking, it can be used to pull about 75 watts out of my head while I'm going uphill. Yes.
We always knew you were a bright guy.
Say again?
We always knew you were a bright guy. Where can we read your writings?
Question, where can we read my writings? A couple of places. I have online publishing on Genie, and I have an area there called Computing Across America, or CAA. And I'm probably occasionally posting things to other networks. I'm getting ready to do some things on America Online and occasionally put some stuff on internet. And I also publish a quarterly journal called No Madness, actually high-tech No Madness. This is available by subscription right here. And also I have a book about my first 10,000 miles called Computing Across America, which is the...
Are you considering any other countries?
Yes, quite a few actually. Probably Europe and Russia, Japan, Australia, Canada, who knows. Every time I predict where I'm going, I turn out to be wrong, so I really can't say exactly where the next trip will be. But the basic, I guess I should back off for a second. The fundamental engineering objective of this new bike is maximum possible autonomy without any connection to support networks and things like that, in communication capability, computing power, electrical power generation, and maintainability. So given that, I should theoretically be able to travel anywhere in the world. Now, there's some regulatory problems. I know a guy who was bicycling around the world, and he was detained for 2 or 3 days in the middle of Africa because he had one of those little pocket shortwave radios that you can buy for 79 bucks. With high-tech equipment like that, he was obviously a spy, so they locked him up. So there are some problems. We have more technology in this bike than the entire militaries of many small countries. So, this is a real concern. I mean, it sounds funny, but I don't want to be the one to have to explain it to the border guards. Yes. Amateur radio is an important part. It does have one fundamental problem in that you can't use it for business traffic. But for a lot of the life support and social support and just kind of networking with people and finding places to stay, it's ideal. It's really hard to imagine doing it without ham radio. It's as important as online networking to me, because there's this sort of worldwide fraternity of people who all are hams. And I would highly recommend that anybody doing any open-ended travel like that get a ham license. It's really not a terribly difficult thing to accomplish, and you know, it's instant contacts. Even with a little 2-meter ham radio, the little handhelds, like this thing will let me reach it. Yeah, I'm ensnared here. Anyway, the little handheld transceivers like you see hams carry. We've been traveling before and coming to towns where we know absolutely nobody. and key up a local repeater, say this is N4RVE Bicycle Mobile, strike up a conversation, and by the time you're within 10 miles of city limits, there's somebody waiting for you to arrive for dinner and a place to stay. Just because, if you're ham, you must be okay, come on over. And that seems to work internationally. Incidentally, I was doing a filming with NHK last year, which is Japan's sort of PBS-like TV network. And I was explaining to them that I can use ham radio on the bike, and said, oh yeah, sometimes I can talk to Japan. And they thought that was neat. So while filming, they said, would you please get on the radio and talk to Japan? Well, it's not always quite that easy, but 10 meters happened to be kind of magical that day, and I made a call, and the first station that came back was somebody in Osaka. So I'm riding along on the bike with a little whip antenna, talking to this guy in Japan. I'm in Milpitas, and I'm explaining the bike to him. And he came back and he says, Harley Davidson. So I've since learned the word jitensha. So. Okay. More questions?
The bike system 7 ready.
Real soon now. Yes. I get wet, but skin is waterproof, so it's okay. Actually, most of the systems are already designed to be pretty waterproof. The exceptions are the front panel, which has to have a clear cover Velcroed over it. And I'm not sure yet whether I believe Blaupunkt about how waterproof those speakers are. They may just be able to get dripped on in your car door, but I'm not sure they could take an all-day rain. So I may have to cover those up. But the idea is to have as little extra effort as possible necessary to cover things up. But we ride in the rain for days, and it's not always an option to just pull up somewhere. So it has to be able to take it. See somebody? Yes.
Take one more question, okay?
Okay.
So all the technology we have here, I don't know if they will know seems like it would be excellent.
Yeah.
Is it available for other people, or?
A lot, actually, quite a bit of this is either borrowed from the handicap industry or inspired by it, and it also, I think, some of it has spin-offs as well. Like the head mouse, the ultrasonic head mouse was the Personics head mouse that was developed a few years ago, and I don't know why they went under, if they priced it wrong or what, but it works great. I think it was made for handicapped people. And I have a program called iRelief that I run on the small DOS screen below the Mac there, which is just a large print text editor that Ken Skier did just for people who are visually impaired. So there's a lot of that. And in a sense, you start looking at what the available resources are and what the constraints are, and how can we get as much bandwidth in and out of the body given these limits. And it's really the same problem as being in a wheelchair and having vision problems. So yeah, it ties in real closely. Okay, well, I guess our time's up. Thank you very much.